and good morning, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here. And happy birthday to the Men's Development Network. It's great that you're 25 years, and it's just really wonderful. I got really excited watching your program this morning, watching your little video, and hearing the talk from Michael. So really, really important work, and it's really a privilege to be part of it. So what my plan was really just to tell you a little bit about the organization that I work with and what we do, and then tell you some of the issues that we're dealing with for families today, and particularly families that are formed outside of marriage. Because Seán said there that we're a lone parent organization. Well, we're actually a family support in that family support sphere, and we're an organization that works with parents who have formed families that are outside of marriage, and I'll explain a bit more of that in time. I have a few videos, a few slides that I will share, just that helps me more think about go through it, but more interested in the discussions that will flow afterwards in some of the things. And I hope that this kind of supports a lot of what Michael has spoken about earlier. So I'm going to share my screen. Is that working?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant.
Sorry, Michael, if you can just pop it into presentation mode so
That
we
is?
can see your notes as well.
Oh, you can, okay.
Yeah, so if you move to the top, I can't see it now because of the way my screen is, but if you pop it into presentation mode before you share it on screen,
Okay.
that should assist you.
Okay. Presentation mode, where's that on the screen?
So if you open the PowerPoint presentation and pop it into presenter mode, so it's the full slide.
Presenter mode is in.
Or from the beginning is what some people use.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And then if you go back into Zoom and press share screen.
Okay. So, yeah, share screen. Okay.
Nothing else. We've set technical challenges for everyone.
That's still, there you go. Is that it now?
That is lovely. Thank you,
Yeah,
Damien.
Perfect. That's a little thing on me here. Perfect. Okay. So just a little bit about us. That, as we said, we were founded in 1976, and we're a national federation of services for parents who have children who are not married to each other. And we work with our member organizations who are based all around the country, for the best interest, promote the best interests of the child and the rights of the child. And when Treoir was set up over 40 years ago, Ireland was a very different country at that time, and we've progressed so much. And it was set up primarily as an organization to support women who had children outside of marriage, and who at the time, children that born outside of marriage were still considered illegitimate, were still considered the women were hugely stigmatized. And we know from our own history here around the issues of mother and babies homes, and we're still dealing with the consequences of those issues, and the forced adoption of children, that were born outside of marriage. So Treoir came to life, really came into being from people who were working in those areas with mothers, primarily mothers who were having children. And the fathers were often not really thought about in that scenario, but it was really about trying to support the mothers. And one of the big earliest work that we did was getting rid of the term illegitimacy, or part of that group. So some of the key issues for families today is the lack of constitutional recognition of all forms of family, so we do support the family in Ireland, but it's a family based on marriage. And so we have the constitutional committee looking at a referendum in relation to changing that, so that will recognize all forms of marriage. The child's right to identity. Treoir believes that every child has a right to identity. It's part of the UN rights of the child. The child has a right to identity. And that's more than just the name of the child in the birth cert, but it's the family names on the birth cert, the child's name, the parents' names on birth cert, so they can extend to who their maternal and paternal grandparents are. And it's very important for a child to have that right of identity. There are issues in relation to guardianship, that men who are married have automatic guardianship of their children, men who are not married do not have automatic guardianship of their children. And Treoir believes that's in ways saying something to men about their role, that if you're not married, you're not committed to this relationship, you do not have the same rights and responsibilities in terms of your child, in raising your child and being part of your child's life. And then access and custody issues, again, if you are not married, you don't have any automatic rights to access and custody, and you have to either negotiate them with the mother and parent or go through the courts to establish them. Unlike if you were married, that those rights are automatically restored. And we believe that the notion of shared parenting, the notion of challenging some of those issues that we heard about earlier of the primary care, which has always fallen on women, whether they chose to or not, has always been fallen on women. That shared parenting is the best way forward to trying to ensure that men take up a more greater role in the caring of their children and alleviate what often is the burden of care that is placed on women in that situation, and not just parent on the weekends, but actually parent in the real way, in the real lives, in the day-to-day lives of children. And the other issue is that we really need to hear what's in the best interest of the child, and we should, when there's conflict in a relationship, we really need thinking about how do we put the child's interest first, and are we hearing the voice of children, how we might do that. So Treoir, just very quickly, we develop policy and research. We have a teen parents support program that works with young children, with young women and men who have children from any age up to 25. We support kinship care, which is the care of children who are cared for other people other than their biological parents, and often outside of the formal care system. And we promote shared parenting and mediation. And the big thing that we do is our National Information Service allows us to have direct contact with the public, where by phone people ring in with queries in relation to parenting issues. And it's primarily parents who are not married, or grandparents, or family members who phone and ring us. We produce publications, we have an up-to-date website, and we provide training and support. So on that, what I wanted to show, and why this slide is important, is that we received over 8,000 queries last year. And traditionally, our calls are, from when we think about break them down to look at mothers and fathers, it's almost 50% of each that will call us, 50% mothers and 50% fathers. But in the first 6 months of this year, we've had over 7,000 queries, and of them, 2,775 of those queries have been from men. And this, to me, debunks the myth that men aren't interested in their children's lives, that men aren't interested. Men call us regularly, daily, in relation to a whole range of issues, which I'll talk about in a second. So there's a real desire and interest in fathers to be part of their children's lives. What do they call us about? There's the main reasons of their queries. The main queries that come in are access and custody, guardianship issues, and maintenance. And sometimes they ring us because they've got a letter from or a court order from the mother of their child asking or requesting maintenance, or asking to fulfill their rights and guardianship access. But primarily it's about men ringing us to see, how do I get to spend more time? How do I get to be more involved in my child's life? And that's really, really important. And that's right every day, every single day, year on year, that hasn't shifted and changed. And so it's really important to tell the story that men want to be involved in their children's lives, but often it's that they don't know how to ask for help. They don't know how to do that. And what they think it is, especially if they're not married to the mother, what they think that involvement often is what's been perpetuated a lot about, access maybe one day a week or over a weekend. And they really are craving for a lot more. And we hear an awful lot of frustrations from men in relation to that. What are the key issues and challenges that we face in trying to bring about more equity and equality in terms of care of children? That unmarried fathers do not have automatic guardianship rights or access to custody rights for their children. And this is at odds with other European countries. It's at odds with what's happening, in our society, what's happening with other issues that we're trying to bring about equity. And there are valid reasons why men don't have automatic rights. There's reasons why this has come about. And it's because, you know, when you think about how we have set up our society and our constitution protecting the rights of children, the rights of the family through marriage, when children were born outside of marriage, it suited many of that masculinity, that toxic masculinity that we talked about, that these children born didn't have any rights, that they were illegitimate, they weren't necessary. And the mother, who was seen to be nothing more than a carrier of that child, had no rights. So in fact, it suited many fathers not to have any guardianship rights. It suited of that time for people not to be part of those children's lives, to put them to the side, to cast them out, or to see them when they wanted to. And so it's understandable why that has come about, but there's a need to shift and look at it differently now. There's a need to change and look at, but how do we ensure that if you have a child that's born, that a father feels automatically that they have a responsibility to care for and love that child and be part of that child's lives and key decisions in relation to that child's lives from the day it's born, rather than having to prove their worthiness of it. Whereas a father who is married has that automatic guardianship rights. And in North of Ireland, in our jurisdiction, we will see that the fathers who are unmarried have automatic guardianship rights, and it hasn't led to a severe breakdown. In fact, it's looking like that it's leading to more engagement of fathers in their children's lives. Inequity of status, as I mentioned, you know, of the unmarried family in relation to the married family. And it's an equality in children's rights issue that, as Treoir sees it. Now there is changes underway, hopefully with the Citizens Assembly asking for a referendum in relation to this issue. There's a lack of knowledge of the applicable legal processes around custody, guardianship, access. So often fathers are very shocked when they find that their name was on their birth cert, they had been in a good relationship with the mother, and that relationship breaks down, and they just don't know where to go or what to do. And so the calls are often from people who are very frightened, very unaware of, and very fearful of having to go to a court process to try and establish contact with their children. And the big thing that we're really trying to promote is this notion of equal opportunities to parenting time, that for fathers really need to own up and accept and take responsibility for the care and nurturing of their children in ways that maybe not have been the traditional way of doing it. And looking at saying, you know, I need to be there when the child is sick. I need to be able to look after and find childcare when my child's sick and I can't go to work. I need to be, you know, as much as the other parent, I need to be doing these things. I need to be there for their homework, not just on a Saturday evening or on a Saturday bringing them to the park. I need to be there doing more of the actual day-to-day care and the parenting time that's spent with the child, rather than just custody and access time. And I talked a little bit about this, the context for why this is happening. You know, and Michael spoke to this in much more greater detail than I can, that women have traditionally held the role of primary care and still do, and that's enshrined in our legislation. The woman is the primary carer. You know, in the courts, they'd always be seen as the primary carer unless there's reasons that they can no longer be. And we need to think about how do we bring men into that role, to be taking on that role of care in relation to children. And then men's engagement with children, often when it's done through the courts, is to facilitate their non-working time. It isn't to facilitate them where they have to organise childcare, turn up and leave work early, get to the kids. It's often facilitated at a time when the courts say, well, when does it suit you to take your children, rather than when is it important that you're with your child? And that goes back to the shared parenting and the equal parenting time. There's a lack of appropriate child-friendly spaces for access visits for fathers. And you know, when they have those visiting times, and if there's any issues in relation to the care and concern for the child, there's a dearth of place, a real lack of appropriate child-friendly spaces for parents to meet with their children. And often you'll hear terrible stories around that have been around, you know, walking around when the weather's bad, and we have a lot of bad days in Ireland, walking around this, you know, supermarket, or what are they called, the Dundrum shopping malls and those places. Pre and post natal relationships and bonding with children is hugely important. And we're seeing that often it's at a later stage in the child's life that the fathers can get involved, and they miss that very important pre and postnatal early childhood development, and especially when you don't and you're not resident with the other mother, with the other parent, how difficult that can be for fathers to get that access time, especially if the child has been fed, breastfed. You know, how does the father build that relationship time, and the fears that are there in relation to letting go your precious bundle of child to somebody else who has no skills and no capacity, or has not learned those skills and capacity to look after an infant child, and all those concerns that go with that. The conflict in adult relationships is a huge problem, and you know, the court model is even more, brings more conflict into those spaces. So that's the context that we're living in and what we're trying to address and change. So what are some of the strategies we might put in place to achieve equity and equality? And we need the systemic change. We need legal changes. We need to look at how birth registration takes place. We need to look at the family courts, and thankfully there are major shifts and changes that are coming in this way. We need to look at the constitutional change that recognizes all types of families. So at a systemic and a systematic level, there's things that need to be done. Then at an individual and personal and cultural shifts in behavioral attitudes based on equality and solidarity between men and women. We need to invest in parenting supports and shared parenting supports. We need to promote what it means to be shared parenting, so we get away from this notion of what fatherhood was, or you know, and promote a more positive attitude of fatherhood. And equal opportunities to parenting time. So really looking at, and there's some really interesting research coming out of the States in relation to parenting time and how the courts are looking at parenting time and insisting on it, and the impact that have over a longer period of time on the relationships between children and their non-residential parent. And the best interest of the child is paramount in all, and informs all of the above. So we really have to have robust and really thorough systems about really including the child's voice at all stages, not just waiting until they're over 12, but at all stages, and really investing in how we hear that voice of the child. We need safe spaces for men to explore fatherhood today, and it was wonderful to hear about Seán talking about the Men's Development Network, and more of that is needed, more spaces where we can come together and talk about what it means to be positive in our fatherhood, you know, what models of fatherhood we'd like and how do we do that. Models of leadership to challenge sexism in all forms and stand against violence against women. So that's exactly, you know, just reiterating what was said earlier. Implementing shared parenting models and equal shared parenting time, that we really look at that. And even if the relation is married relations, we look at what does it mean to share that parenting equally. And it doesn't mean that you morph into the same, because we bring different ideas to that. We bring different styles to parenting. We did bring different, you know, attitudes to parenting. And some of them, once there's an agreement and once there's, you know, there's your communications, it's about how do you do that more equally and more fairly, and that you take that care for the children. And it isn't just left that when you're both going out to work in the morning and the child is sick, that the mother has to stay because her job isn't as important as the father's. And it's really getting that notion in that we really need to try and support, you know, and place in work, and what we talked about in the man box, that the fathers who do that are supported and actually valued more in the systems that allow that to happen. And then the family support services need to reach out and include fathers. And a lot of the stuff that we've heard from fathers over the years is they don't feel that these services are there for them. They don't feel that their visibility in those services, they don't see the images of men in those services that will allow them to feel that's something I can walk into and feel safe in and feel I can talk and open up about. And the focus on development of positive parenting skills and improving the quality of father-child relationships. Spelled my relationships wrong there, but the focus is so really about, you know, how do we really develop those child-father relationships, and how do you make sure that they can be maintained and developed over time, and as the child grows, and how a father stays involved with that child throughout his life. So that's just a very short input from me about what I see as some of Treoir sees as some of the key issues that we see around fatherhood today, and how we might address and support a more positive attitude towards fatherhood, and some of the challenges that we meet. And really more interested in having a broader discussion about some of that. So I'm open to anybody to come back with questions or to give me your thoughts on it.
Listen, thank you very much, Damien. And it is what really struck me in terms of your presentation there, I suppose, they're coming at all of the various other areas of work that just have been talked about there from what Michael was saying, but coming from a different direction into the work, but they're all the same issues, which I also are kind of interesting. but I'll offer it out to other people to ask a question, but I do have one to maybe to start with, and it is very much around, I suppose, when we talk about working with fathers and challenging them to take a more proactive role, or to look having a proactive role in their caring for their children, wherever it may be. I suppose our work, we very much work around a non-adversarial engagement is what we try to do. But inevitably, the work, this type of work in terms of engaging fathers, comes from a very adversarial, it seems to find itself in an extremely adversarial place. Now, I don't know whether that's based on the court or whether it's based on the breakup of the relationship in the first instances, or is it sometimes the quest to have access to your child becomes an objective, it becomes the goal rather than actually the real thing is about putting the child at the center. So that's that one question. And Niall then has a question. Then after that, we'll get him in a minute. Okay.
Yeah, and Seán, you're absolutely right. I mean, the one of the big things that we've looked at in our last strategic plan was trying to look at what could we offer in terms of support of the an alternative to the courts. Because we see that even people who've gone in who like each other as parents have ended up been very, very, in conflict, in huge conflict, because they almost feel they have to speak ill of the other parent in order to get what they feel they need in relation to the access to the child. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes quite adversarial. And some of that is in the context of what people are told to say. Like often, I mean, we've heard people saying that, while waiting for my court, I spoke to other men and they told me, make sure you go in, and they didn't think that they were going in that way. They went in and became much more adversarial. So we created a program called Let's Work It Out, which is based around conflict resolution and managing conflicts and learning how to deal with conflicts and how to de-escalate conflict and how to communicate more effectively with their parent. And there's a suite of supports that I've done with people who were mediators, who are retraining in terms of being able to provide ongoing support. And the wonderful thing about the program is it can be done as an individual. So I can go in if I'm finding that I need that support, or as a couple, which is unique in the sense that often those mediations require two people to be involved, but you can learn and the skills of yourselves to try and build it, to break that conflict down. But the key bit of what you said is what's in the best interest of the child. And that's what we constantly try to promote, is what's in the best interest of the child. Because parents can have different ideas of parenting and different styles of parenting, and learning parenting differently, so who do we learn how to parent from? And it's mostly from our own experience of being parented ourselves, and there's very few of us that have gone and done parenting courses. When you think of the broader things, we learn on the hoof, we learn as we go, we might ask questions, might read a book, but very few of us do. So when parents, they fall out over things that seem small but are huge in the lives of each other, such as we often hear things like he didn't put a coat on when the weather got cold, she came home with a runny nose, so they don't know how to communicate to each other. They don't know how to have that conversation. It seems like everything they say is a criticism to each other, and critiquing their parents' parenting styles. And so it's really important that we try and create spaces for parents to be able to learn how to communicate more effectively, so that they don't exacerbate a situation where there's already tensions about if they, and particularly if the relationship is broken down through ways that they don't like each other anymore. That can be very, very fraught, and courts don't tend to lend to better outcomes in that regard. They just tend to
no, well, it's good that there is a program like that, and I suppose I'm just thinking about how do we kind of promote those kind of programs, because I think that is the way in which to go forward. I'm going to call in Niall there. You have a question there, Niall. If you want to unmute yourself and maybe show us your face if you want to do so.
I if you don't mind, I won't show you my face, scruffy as it is. I'm inside in my kitchen. But thank you, Seán, and thank you, Damien. My name is Niall Rinn. I'm a family support worker at the Bandon Family Resource Centre in County Cork. This is a subject that's dear to me in terms of men and fathers in particular. I suppose just some observations. I mean, I think the issue with fathers really starts in the Constitution and the overemphasis of the value of the mother versus the father. And I see this all the time in my work with fathers, this sort of kind of an apathy that they have in relation to engaging. They don't feel like they're important. They don't feel their value. So I suppose for me, I think the wider narrative on fathers needs to be looked at, and how we view fathers, and rather than maintenance and access and custody, which of course are all very important things, but I think it's about instilling in young men at an early age the importance of fatherhood. And it's not that fathers are a sideline to the parenting journey. They're a 50% important part of it. And that's not the case in the court. I mean, the burden of proof for fathers in the courts is on the father. So, and I've experienced this both personally and professionally, and it's sort of like it's just there isn't what am I trying to say? There isn't a balance in terms of how we view mothers and fathers. And you know, there's obviously, for the first 2 years of a child's life, the mother is the more important carer. That's true, but I think fathers are walking away. Fathers are not engaging. I have run in the last 4 or 5 months in Bandon a group called a Fathers Group, and incredibly difficult to get fathers to engage. I'm also trying as well in September now. I'm going to start there's a program that's been developed through UCC called Just for Dads. It's a 10-week program that I'm going to try and run. And I say try and run because it's the issue is engaging fathers. I don't really have a question per se, but thank you for letting me speak. It's just I think the Constitution needs to be looked at, and how fathers are viewed. I get fathers coming into me and they're terrified of not being able to see their children and worrying about their maintenance rather than talking about their value. They never speak about their value. It's always they come in sort of how will I say it, a smaller parent than the mother, regardless of what the story is. And the story could be his fault, her fault, their fault, the two of them together. Regardless of what the story is, they always come in. Very few of them say, "I'm this child's father. I must see them. I demand to see them." They come in saying, how much maintenance will I have to pay? Will I be able to see them? They're almost afraid because they know that a lot of the power is on the mother. And in my own personal case, my son was removed into my custody, which was extremely unusual in terms of children being moved over to the father. And this got me interested in the whole subject, because then I'm like, but I can't be the only one who's having difficulty here. Why is it so unusual for fathers to get their children if the mother is acting inappropriately? Anyway, I won't take up too much time.
I think it's an interesting point, Niall, but I think one of the words that you used that really struck me, and I think it's about when you talk about caring, as opposed to even fatherhood or parenthood or whatever it is. When we talk about, we try to look at, there is a campaign about kind of called Men Care, which is about the kind of introducing the concept of care for men in terms of what do we mean by caring, what is our caring role, how do we take more caring roles within the family environment. And I think I think the discourse and the discussion and the language around fatherhood is quite adversarial and is quite the words, the things like that, they're very practical to a certain degree, and they're non-emotional, which is not necessarily the best starting point in terms of trying to engage and see what's best for a child. I don't know what you think about that, Damien.
Just, I mean, a couple of things I think, and be open to what others feel, but there's a few things that struck me in what you said now, and one of the bits. Courts for parents. I mean, I briefly went over the context of why this is the case, and it means it needs a lot more in depth. But there's historically, you know, the masculine, the patriarchal masculine society, which was set up, which has established a court systems, which established is still is way behind, and the inequalities that women face, you know, in relation to the care of their children is not without doubt. So there's no, it's quite normal and obvious to me why the courts would see the mother as the primary carer, and that's the way it is. It's normal that they would do that, because that's the system that the courts have come out of. But things are shifting and changing, and I think we are part of those changes, and this discussions like today are part of those changes. You know, because that hasn't done women favors, and it's made women end up like, you know, the stats for. I was at the pre-budget submissions yesterday, and the ERSI did the research, and again, this is not it, but every time we go to them, that lone parents, who are 90% are mostly women, are the highest, you know, are more at risk for poverty and exclusion, and their children are more at risk of getting stuck in poverty and social exclusion. So, I mean, women have borne the brunt of that masculine toxic society, you know, and so, you know, then you go into court and fathers demand an equality of care, you know, of their children, and in some cases, in many cases, they're not. But the courts are based on that system. So we need to look at how we shift and change that. But the bit that I would say is that we get calls from both parents who've been into court. Both feel that they've lost. Most times, both feel that they've lost. They've lost something, that either he got more or she got more, and both of them from the same court, because they give away the power to make decisions to that judge, and instead of figuring it out themselves, and then they try to, and most of those court orders end up breaking down, and that's where we come in and deal with a lot of the fallout of those, because people aren't able to sustain them, but they give them a framework to try and start working within. And you know, when you mentioned about the first 2 years of a child's life being very important, and you know, that's really also a space that fathers miss out on, is that they really need to find ways. We really need to find ways to engage and build that meaningful relationship with our children at that stage, because those connections are hugely important in later years, you know, and so it's really important that we stay involved and stay stuck into our, you know, at those stages in our child's lives. But a lot of what you said is about the promotion of different ways of parenting, promotion of the fatherhood of the role, and the onus and emphasis. One of the biggest reasons that we get from mothers calling us is when they go to court and get a court order for you know, a father gets access and you know, and custody, is getting him to take that up. They are fed up that the father turns down, doesn't turn up for the day, doesn't go. And what can I make him? Can I make him take the children? The courts don't seem to want to make him take the children. And so you've got all those extremes within our scenario. So what I'm interested in is what's going on for fathers that they feel that they aren't willing to take that up. They've been to court, they've asked for it. What's going on in those relationships that they aren't? And we need to get beyond the fighting to figure out, well, what's happening, how do we make it better, what's happening that, you know, that they can do it, so that they would take that responsibility and that
I think one of the issues, sorry to cut across you, Damien, I think one of the issues I see is fathers would say to me, I've nowhere to bring them. I'm not condoning their excuses, or even if they are, maybe they're not excuses, but they would say to me things like, I've nowhere to bring them, sure, she has the house, I'm sleeping on my mother's couch or my friend's couch, I've nowhere to take them, I have to work, I have to pay her maintenance. So there is something to be said about looking at that as well. There's an imbalance there. And I suppose I'm sure that there are loads of fathers, and I've sat in front of them and they've said, no, I can't take him for a minute longer than what I'm taking the child. And that makes it very difficult for single mothers. But I suppose where I come in as a family support worker is to try and sit down with these dads and try and relate to them the importance of being a dad. And, you know, as has been discussed, you're not just a weekend father and coming in 2 or 3 times a week and showering the children with goodies and letting them do whatever they want to do. That's not proper parenting either. So yeah, I'm not sure. I definitely think we could do with more contact centers throughout the country. They're very lacking. There should be more facilitation for fathers to, rather than picking up the kids at 10 o'clock on Saturday and bringing them down to McDonald's on a rainy day and sitting there all day. Do you know, whatever it is? But yeah, I mean,
I think there's certainly that discussion and that space needs to be made available, and a bit more thought needs to go into this. I think in terms of how we respond to fathers in terms of the challenges that they would have. I'm just going to go with this. I'm just conscious of time there. I know Sarah has a hand up there and she has that question. So thanks for that, Neil.
Thank you, Seán.
Sarah.
Thanks. Thanks, Damien, and thanks also to yourself and Niall. Sarah Benson's my name. I'm the CEO with Women's Aid, and I suppose there's a lot in this. I don't know if they're questions or just kind of observations, but I suppose from our perspective, I think a lot of what's been tipped on there from us, it's fundamental, is that structural, the systemic issue. Homing in on one specific example, which, Damien, you know what I'm going to say here, is automatic guardianship. We don't think automatic guardianship is the solution, because actually you have to look at the context in which fatherhood is either valued or devalued, or the responsibility of fatherhood, not in monetary terms, but in kind of the value of the relationship, how our society has dealt with that and how it continues to impede it. And Damien, you're 100% right, because it's at the cost of mothers and obviously of children, that we have that complete imbalance historically in terms of the expectations of mothers of any age, but particularly young women. Automatic guardianship is not automatic everywhere. There's many different countries where it isn't, and huge variations. I mean, Austria, Germany, Denmark, you know, they do not have it. There's a lot. I think it's really important to consider one particular context, which of course is a loving, intimate relationship that is not within marriage, is just one example. But domestic violence, pregnancy as a result of a relationship that isn't a relationship at all, the constant domestic violence, obviously, for our situation, the consequences in terms of the burden that puts on the primary carer, the mother in this instance, is overwhelming in terms of you can't get passports for children. You have to consult with somebody who may not wish to engage at all on schools, on faith, on everything. And I think that's really important to put that in context. An automatic overweening legislative approach we don't think is the solution to this. What we do see is urgently and continually the need both to value care work in a non-gendered way and try and emphasize the value of care. And I know that with our constitution, we have been looking to there's now the recommendation to remove Article 42.2, which is, you know, the value of the mother in the home, and replace it with a value for care. And that's beginning of life right through end of life care, because the burden of caring for our elders, although we don't have quite as positive example as other countries in terms of doing that in the family setting, but if it does happen in the family setting, it's the women in the family who do it, and then the care for children at the start of life. And that has huge life-limiting consequences for overwhelmingly women, which is, you know, the risk of poverty. You've mentioned lone parents, but also the restriction on life opportunities, particularly if women become pregnant early and they're parenting alone or primarily alone in terms of taking up educational career chances. So there's transgenerational issues that then follow. I think we need to look at that structure, and in that, where and how do we value and encourage fatherhood at all ages? And I think there's a huge problem with that. This balancing of rights and responsibilities, and that always becomes, or often becomes, siloed in, like, you know, my rights, you know, to contact, to legal entitlements, and my responsibilities to pay. But I think that that's an unhelpful binary interpretation of rights and responsibilities in relation to fatherhood and how we value the roles of fathers in all different relationships. And I think that those are the things we need to be focusing on together collectively. And I know that we have a lot of conversations and intersections on this, but the courts, unfortunately, are by definition adversarial systems. But our experience is that, you know, more often than not, when guardianship enters courts, it's on the back of an application for maintenance, and the reaction is then to apply for guardianship. It's like, well, if she wants me to pay, I'm going to make sure my legal rights are enshrined. So that's the conflict which we see play out again and again. So I think much more what Niall was saying around encouraging fathers from the offset to see, you know, that it's not about me paying, but it's about me being present. And our experience is that even when there is high conflict and domestic violence and abuse, is that moms really do want the dads to be involved in their fathers' lives. They are rarely an impediment, but the issue is around consistency, you know, quality, and the point has been made about contact centres. And just to share something that we were really distressed to discover from the Department of Justice just yesterday is we have our new National Domestic Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Strategy, and Damien, you'll see an email I included you on there earlier today. In the draft of the strategy, child contact centres were included. We're the only country in the EU, I believe, who do not have state-sponsored accessible contact centres, and that's to encourage access and contact, not just for fathers, it can be for separated mothers as well, not just for domestic violence, it can be where there's other complex family needs, perhaps addiction, things like that going on. That was in the first draft. It was taken out of the final draft, and we thought it was a typo because the action number was still there, but there was nothing. And we contacted them and said, we assumed this was a typo, and they have come back to say, no, it wasn't. There wasn't agreement. And that is of such concern to us in Women's Aid and our colleagues, including, I'm sure, yourselves, because we have the family justice strategy, which is being developed, and this tells us that there isn't agreement on something so fundamental. So I think where our energies are best pursued is looking at the structures that will, if court is, you know, something that happens, that there are structures to support families, but ideally structures then to prevent families getting in there in the first place, which is encouraging positive relationships, engagements, and really encouraging young fathers, but not just young fathers, to say, look, you know, you may not be in the relationship, but, you know, you have an opportunity here to be a really valuable contribution to your child's life. So sorry, those are my observations. I realize there's no question in there effectively.
I don't know if you want to respond to that, Damien.
Well, no, I mean, I know I share a huge amount of what Sarah said and agree with her. And sometimes that term automatic does have huge problems because we don't, and it's wrong to say automatic because not every father would have automatic rights, because there are some fathers who should not be involved in their children's lives. And particularly fathers where that child has been born out of violence, rape, you know, what gives them a right, you know, to that having a say in that child's life. So yeah, automatic isn't right, but Sarah and I both, we've had this conversation a lot, so we know that we're saying that's where there's a willingness and desire to be involved in their children's lives. What we see it as an impediment for it's sending a message to dad that you don't have to be, you don't have to, you know, and that's the bit that we're trying to overcome. And it's part of that broader. It's not the panacea. It's one of the measures. But I am absolutely sorry to hear that, and as Niall mentioned there earlier, that the contact centres is hugely important. Safe, child-friendly. You know, we've very few. I mean, I shouldn't say none, but there's very few, and they're usually about, you know, children in care, you know, where they are available.
And they're voluntary provided. They're not
voluntary providers, exactly.
Or you have to pay for them.
Or you have to pay for them. Yeah, and so they're you know, that's hugely, you know, problematic. And so, as you said, that, you know, if your only option is to bring your child to McDonald's and you sit in there while it's raining, you know, or sit in your car, drive around the block, you know, it's not very beneficial for you, your child, for building those relationships. So, you know, that's huge things, and we will support whatever needs to be done to try and shift that back. Sorry to hear that, Sarah. Good spot that you saw there in that draft. Yeah, no, look, I think there's a huge part of what needs to happen, and a lot of it is systemic, and a lot of it does. The courts are not the solution. They are part of the solution, but they are not the solution. And the more we can invest in the pre-court and the mediation, and the Let's Work It Out type programs and other supports out there for parenting, I think the more chance we have for parents to really, and thinking really engaging around what does it mean to put your child first at the center of this? What's in the best interest of your child? Mm-hmm. And that may mean not seeing a parent who is aggressive, violent, you know, isn't showing, you know, isn't willing to look outside and promote new ways of being, of acting like a father or a man, you know. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that the best interest of the child is to see both parents. It's best interest of the child to know and be cared for where possible, you know, and where it's safe to do so. I think those lines are very important, you know. Okay. And any parent, for mothers.
And maybe speaking about on that there's something in the chat there from Deirdre from Share Ireland around maybe if she wants to come in and talk about it, if she could do that and maybe ask the question, but it's with the notion of parental alienation has been dismissed, and it's a tool that the abusive fathers use to continue to control the mothers through the courts. not overly sure about that, and also, but even in terms of where parental alienation fits, and certainly, but if Deirdre wants to come in and qualify that, that'd be great to do that, or if she's just happy to leave that as it is. I suppose like
if I could just add, I mean, I'm very happy to share with Deirdre Women's Aid submission on that. I mean, we don't disagree that there's bad behavior where there's relationship breakdown, but we don't think parental alienation is either a coherent concept or something that's useful in the context of the courts in particular. So I'm happy to share with her our submissions on our website.
And vice versa, and I'm very happy to do so too. We made a submission on it recently to that. And again, our view is that at the moment, we don't feel it's a useful concept to try and promote. And while we do recognize that there are, in all things, you know, there are cases where fathers have been actively excluded from their children's lives. And that's something that we don't agree with. You know, we don't believe that parental alienation, the way it's been currently discussed and utilized, is a helpful in terms of trying to bring about the changes that we're talking about. And finding.
I think we probably have a similar approach in that it's a very child-centered approach that we in the Men's Development Network have in relation to parental alienation. We see it as child abuse more so, and we work at it from that particular perspective. And I think there's no doubt, and there certainly has been terminology around using the term to kind of to generate a particular kind of way within the course. That certainly has happened, and we can have seen that, and that's unhelpful as well. We certainly see that. Niall has got his hand up there. Do you want to ask a question now?
Yeah, I think it's been kind of answered, but well, maybe you could just clarify it a bit. You don't think it's a useful term, parental alienation. Are you talking in the context of court, obviously? But
no, just in our case entirely. It's so diffuse. It's not clearly defined. There is so what we see is that there's a variety of different scenarios in which children are impacted in terms of contact with their parents, both mothers and fathers. In our experience, where sometimes it's that coercive control, which is a defined concept, it's a legal concept. That is the useful context in which to examine it. And then in other scenarios, there is such a diversity of backdrop and experience that to try and shoehorn the behaviors that might be the backdrop to children's reluctance to engage with parents, to try and shoehorn it all into one concept called parental alienation, we think is not at all useful either for the parents involved and particularly for the children. So just the term itself we feel is unhelpful because it is far too diffuse.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. That you've explained that very well to me. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll drop it in the chat, the link to our thing, if people want to
do that. That'd be great. I think Deirdre's come back saying, yes, that's my point, that the term has been dismissed, and it's more about the coercive control being identified. I think this is the point, Deirdre, that I'm not saying that the coercive control is the legal concept in which to move from this. Parental alienation as a concept, I suppose, in some sense, it needs to be full agreement on it, but we would certainly see it as not a syndrome that affects fathers and mothers and grandparents, wherever it may be. But the true element of parental alienation, or the downside of parental alienation for us, is the abuse of the child. That's the critical element that we see there, and that all the other aspects that happen within the breakup of the family, in terms of the bad feeling, wherever it is, to classify it, Sarah would say, within an overarching concept of parental alienation, I think is unhelpful at this particular time. And then we're moving with it. Yeah. I don't know if you want that to say there, Damien.
No, I just totally agree. That's exactly where we're coming from in it too. It just isn't useful, and coercive control, you know, while it has highlighted an issue, going back what Michael presented on, and the need for promoting the fact that the fathers want to be involved in their children's lives. How do we support that? How do we get more towards the caring that role and shifting that dynamic, rather than as Sarah said, shoehorning all issues into this notion of parental alienation, where a dad might not have got to see his child, and there's a whole set of reasons. And we've had horrendous cases here where fathers have rung us during COVID and have told us that they haven't seen their child for 18 months. Because COVID's been used as an excuse, for that. Now, But to criminalize that under, or to try and find a way under parental alienation, we don't think is a useful way of trying to deal with those issues.
Okay, I'm just conscious that we're coming to the time that we're at, Damien. So I'm just going to try if you can wrap it up and allow people to step out and get a bit of a breather and a cup of coffee. And
yeah, I had one thought that I'd like to just, I mean, it struck me that, and this just came up with my own sibling actually, and it was about rethinking of what it means to act like a man. And he was saying he's a wonderfully sensitive soul. He's a really kind-hearted person, and he was saying to me, you know, I got really offended. I was at something, and a person he really admires said to him, John, you're wonderful. I shouldn't have said his name, but you're wonderful. You're wonderful. You're very feminine. And he thought, why did she say that to me? I mean, I mean, it's a bit like the bit in the man box that he has an issue with what she was espousing, that those qualities. And then what I was saying to, well, maybe that what we need to do is promote them as masculine qualities as well. That to be sensitive, to be caring, to be, you know, kind, to be patient, and with all those things that she saw in him as being effeminate, that in somehow his masculinity was being challenged, but it wasn't. It was been promoted. But the notion that you can be, and they are signs of a male masculine, you know, positive masculinity, I suppose, is what we're trying to get to. And I just really was struck by that and how it impacted on him and his notion. Well, should I be more hard? You know what? You know, and I think that really spoke to Michael in the man box. And so I'd leave you with that thought.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Damien. Really appreciate that, and everyone else who's attended here for this session. Again, thank you for your time and your effort put into it, Damien. And listen, I think if you just leave it and head back into the lobby yourself,
thanks for
you can either go about continuing to do more networking if you wish to do so, or you can just check out and then come back in at the next workshop sessions, which are at, I think are at 12 o'clock. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.